Hi, lovely to have you here. Welcome to the Electro Revolution channel. My name is Michael and I'm a car and tech enthusiast. In this episode today, we're going to talk about the road user charge, or the road user tax as many of the media outlets are now calling it. We're going to discuss the fors and against. Now, why is this coming up? Well, I remember I did a video on the 9th of August where I spoke about the potential of a road user charge in Australia and how it would look like. And primarily I compared it with the New Zealand system, where in New Zealand they actually have a road user charge. They buy 1,000-kilometre licenses and various things like that I discussed in that video. If you haven't seen that video, I invite you to go watch it. But for now, what we're doing is we're going to analyse the fors and against of why we should have it and why we shouldn't have it. Now, I know this is a debatable topic, but I'm going to try and present facts and try and get rid of the myths that a lot of people can use to argue against EV drivers in particular. So I really hope you enjoy this video. So let's look at the first claim or assertion that essentially says EV drivers don't pay their fair share. Now, when we try and understand what this fair share means, it's directed primarily at the fuel excise, that other drivers or non-EV drivers pay a fuel excise at the pump and EV drivers don't. Now, when you look at what the fuel excise is actually collected for and who collects it, it actually goes into general revenue, the ATO's general revenue, and it's collected for the federal government. Now, when you look at how much of that fuel excise that's collected, every single year we're talking billions of dollars. I think this year was $16 billion. If you look at how much of that actually goes into roads from the federal government, you'll find over the last 10 years on average it was 57%. It's not really that much. And you know, there's a breakup of where this money goes, but 57% over 10 years. Of course, some years were more, some years were less. That is the average over the last 10 years. Now, when you compare that to a country like New Zealand, where I did the analysis of that on the 9th of August in that video, if you haven't watched it, I invite you to go watch it. New Zealand has a land transport fund specifically for the excise and all the taxes collected for roads, and all of that money goes into roads, unlike what we do in Australia. So from the Australian perspective on the fuel excise, that needs tax reform. It doesn't need more taxes. Anyway, let's go to the fairness argument. So, who pays for our road maintenance? And you'll largely agree, again, you can look this up, our state governments do and our local councils do. They're the guys that fix our potholes. You know, our state government is the one that builds new roads and maintains roads. Federal government doesn't really help that much in it. So, if you look at where they collect this money from, that money comes from vehicle registrations. And do EV owners pay for vehicle registrations? Absolutely, just like everyone else. And it also comes from driver's license fees. So, do EV owners pay driver's license fees or taxes? Absolutely, just like everyone else. And the money for local councils comes from land rates. And do EV owners that own homes pay council rates? Absolutely, just like everyone else. So there's no unfairness there. The EV owners pay their way just like any other Australian citizen. So, where is this coming from, this particular statement? Well, someone would say for the EV owners, they have less registration fees on the vehicle. Well, that's partly true. Some states discount it for the registration fees for EV owners. Some states don't. Now, why do they discount it? They discount it to encourage more EV investment, more EV owners to drive EVs. Now, generally speaking, a good tax policy benefits the Australian society. And of course, buying EVs does benefit the Australian society. If you just look at the health, for example, statistics were released this week to say that 1,800 Australians die from exhaust fumes every single year unnecessarily. Now, that's higher than our national road toll every year. Think of that. Our national road toll is advertised on TV. We get double demerit points. We get smashed with fines and things like that from all sorts of things. And the road toll doesn't even match what the people die from just from exhaust fumes. So Is there an incentive to give to people to buy EV vehicles with lower registration fees? Absolutely, it's a good tax policy that. But does it happen across Australia? Absolutely not. Not every state does it. So it's not really an argument to say, also EV drivers are having less registration fees, so that's not fair. That's not totally true. And with the tax system being reformed in those states, that'll eventually be phased out. So I hope that covers that one point. So when you look at point two is that the fuel excise is specifically collected to fund roads. Now, the reason we're talking about this assumption is that it's still linked by ministers in our government to say that this is the reason it's collected when it's clearly not. And it's assumption, it's a purported statement that a lot of them make. Some of them don't make it, which they know the truth, but many of them still link the fuel excise with roads. And what we know is since 1992 specifically, it's all the fuel excise has been going to the general revenue collected by the ATO, and it goes to funding everything. So let's drill down on this a little bit to try and analyze what we're talking about here. So as we know, the turning point on fuel excise collection to go into general revenue was in 1992. Now, when you look at the percentages that was actually spent by the federal government, it's gone as high as, say, the 2020 to 2021 year at 71%, which is a really good proportion of the fuel excise collected going into general revenue but being spent on roads and land transport. But you can go as little as 31% in 2012. Now, if you're collecting billions of dollars and you're only spending 31% of that on what it's meant to be collected for on the roads, that's just, okay, I'll give you an example, a better way to explain it. Let's say, for example, I'm contributing to a charity, and if you know, every year in Australia we have bushfires, and a lot of people suffer from these bushfires. Some of them lose their homes and they need shelters and then they need help. Now, let's say, for example, there's a charity that I want to contribute to, and the charity clearly says that the money that is contributed by the Australian people, and we're very generous here, thank God for that, but the money that's being collected will go to those bushfire victims. And all of a sudden, you hear that they're not actually spending the money that they've collected for that purpose, but they're spending it to some other worthy cause overseas. How would you feel about that? This is the same situation. If they're collecting the money for the purposes of bushfire victims, it should go to those bushfire victims and not be redirected somewhere else. And it's exactly the same thing with the tax or the fuel excise collected on the fuel pump. If it's being collected for roads, it should be spent on roads, and that's all we're saying. So the link between the fuel excise and roads, it's, even though a substantial portion of it on average is being spent on the roads, linking them, as politicians do, as many politicians do, and even some people in the media do it, linking them is just not true. It's a myth, and that's all we're saying here. So I hope that covers point two. So point three. So the question is, EV drivers are using the roads for free. Well, what we've already determined through the other 2 points is that where the fuel excise goes, that's collected, and also that EV drivers pay for registration fees, license fees, land rates, and all of this other stuff, because the large majority of the repair of our roads is actually put on the burden of state and local governments, like councils, but mostly the state. And I supplied those figures earlier. So the question is, do EV drivers use the roads for free? Absolutely not, because they pay for all of those things. So where does this type of statement come from? Well, again, it comes specifically for not paying fuel excise. Well, it's strange because you can't charge an EV driver fuel excise when they're not using fuel. So you can't do that. That's actually illegal. If they're not at the pump, they're not pumping fuel, they're not getting a service, and they're not getting a product, then how can you charge them a tax for it? So This is where the road user charge comes from. Now, as I've explained in the previous video I made between Australia and New Zealand and the comparison of the road user charge, I'm actually a supporter of the road user charge. I think it's a great idea, but universally put on all road users, and the removal of the fuel excise, completely the removal of the fuel excise. Now, when you do look at the fuel excise for petrol cars, it technically is a road user charge, because essentially the more you drive, the more you have to put fuel. So the more you drive, the more you use the roads, the more you have to put fuel. It's essentially a road user charge when you really come to think of it. And you could also consider it as a carbon tax, because if you're polluting the air, that's eventually going to affect everyone and needs cleaning up and all of this other stuff, then that is a carbon tax also. But let's not go into there. Looking at a road user charge universally between all vehicles really makes sense to me. Now, how would you then spend that money that's collected? Well, that's the other thing. We should have a fund dedicated to land transport and spending that money specifically on the roads and nothing else. If they need to collect revenue for other things, then increase taxes there or decrease taxes somewhere else. And another note I would say here is you have to also remember the long-term plan that has to be sustainable for this country. The long-term plan is petrol cars eventually won't exist. There would be, of course, a small niche for classic cars or vintage cars or things like that. But generally speaking, petrol cars are being outlawed across the world. Many countries have a limit of 2035 where petrol cars will no longer be on sale, and they have to do zero emission cars. And of course, zero emission may not include just EVs. It could include hydrogen, because hydrogen is a fuel that's zero emission. It could include other technologies that maybe we're not aware of today. But I would guess that the majority of vehicles in the world at the time that petrol cars cease to exist or cease to exist for sale and become illegal for sale, then EV cars would be the majority of the vehicles that are out there. And that's only because of the trends we see with batteries and solar power and all this sort of stuff that we're looking at. So that's another point to consider. The other thing you've got to think about is petrol cars these days are actually more efficient than they were 20 years ago and 10 years ago. So how would you then continue to charge them additional fuel excise or have the revenue continue to grow for the government on fuel excise when people at the pump have to pump less fuel because their cars are more efficient? So it's not a good strategy, in my opinion, to keep the fuel excise. Road user charges seem the most logical way forward, and if it's spent collectively on specifically on the roads, then I think that would benefit our country and benefit the entire population, and we would have better roads end of the day if 100% of it was spent on there. So that's my opinion. I mean, give me your opinions there, but I've based some of those statements on fact. If you have a different idea of that, please let us know. And another thing there is road user charges are completely sustainable. So for example, if it starts to cost a little bit more money to maintain roads, if state governments aren't doing a great job or they haven't got enough money to continue to repair the roads, then the federal government that collects these road user charges, because we already know states can't do it as far as the High Court is concerned, only federal can, then they can keep generating that revenue and keep contributing to the state's budgets to go ahead and fix those roads or build new roads or new highways or things like that. So sustainability is also fixed there by getting rid completely of the fuel excise and with the suggestions I suggested earlier. So I hope that covers point 3. So that was the end of episode 1. Now, I will say one comment. When discussing topics like this, you'll find out on the internet there's not really too many people that actually delve into specifics like this. I mean, there's general road user charge videos, but videos like this are very difficult to actually find, and there's a reason for that. Topics like this are quite emotive, they're emotional in essence. And what that means is, we're brought up by our own traditions, our own thoughts, our own ideas, And you know, we're all brought up with ICE vehicles, and change is sometimes very difficult. So taking, for example, me, when I research a topic, I research as much as I can on that topic, both the good points and the bad points, so I can make an informed decision and I can have an opinion which looks at the broader picture. Now, again, going through topics like this individually with the points, I know it can cause debate and I know it can cause sometimes division, but that's not the idea of all of this. The idea of all of this is to present the facts and have discussions on the ideal situation which we can have in our country, because we all love our country. We all love our country and we want the best for our country. And our country needs taxes to survive. It needs taxes to grow. We are a wealthy nation, and thank God for that. But we need to do it in the right way so we don't, crush citizens. So this is where some of these topics come from and some of my opinions come from. We need taxes. Of course, we would love all of us to live without taxes, but we need taxes for our economy. We need taxes to grow our country. We need taxes to maintain our country. Now, that's why I've been covering topics like this, and I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this content with someone who'd enjoy it, or just leave a comment. It really does all help. Until the next episode, I hope to see you there. Bye for now.